Hello, my name is Alyssa Chisholm, and this is my TOK oral presentation. My first knowledge situation is BBC reporter Anita Rani traveled to Japan in order to seek out information on Japan's decreasing population epidemic. While there, she learned about a social class or a subculture of people called otakus. An otaku is basically a Japanese word for fanboy or fangirl who obsesses over pop culture things like comics, video games, animes, and things of that sort. Another subculture within the otaku group is a group of people known as herbivores who do not participate in sex because they get the satisfaction they would like out of relationships, such as video game characters like the character from this game, Love Plus. When Anita Rani interviewed two otakus in Japan about the relationships, they said things like, I would have to second guess about dating a 3D woman because dating real life women are too complex and I get the emotional satisfaction I would like out of the video game character I have. Anita Rani also asked, is this arousing? Do you find sexual arousal out of this relationship? And the men said, no, I would never think of anything like that. I love her too much in a platonic way. And this brings me to my knowledge question. To what extent can imagination replace sense perception? And just to define and clarify, sense perception is from the Oxford Dictionary. Sense perception is defined as any of the faculties of sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch by which the body perceives an external stimulus, or perceived by a sense or senses. Imagination from the Oxford Dictionary is defined as the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not presented to the senses, or the ability of the mind to be creative or resourceful. This is important to keep in mind because imagination is one of the few ways of knowing that does not involve the other ways of knowing at all. In fact, it is completely separate from sense perception. This is important because, unlike the other ways of knowing, imagination has no limits or any boundaries. It is essentially limitless because one's imagination can know or find knowledge from anywhere. Another important thing is that some people are incapable of certain senses, so they are incapable of sense perception in certain ways. For instance, they may have a disability such as blindness or deafness, and if imagination can replace sense perception, they can be, by using their imagination, they can come closer to a form of cultural normalcy. Another part of why it's important is because people can find greater gain in the human experience because of the fact that imagination has no limits, unlike sense perception. And the last, but maybe the most important part, is that danger can be imagined before it's sensed or perceived. For instance, if one is in the jungle and one hears the crinkling of leaves behind them, one can imagine that there is a tiger behind them and therefore get out of danger. They did not see or sense perceive the tiger, but because their imagination took place, they can imagine that the tiger was there and save their life. When coming back to my implication, a little point to keep important when relating the otaku subculture and herbivores in Japan is that the primary religion of Japan is Shintoism, and within the Shintoism belief, they believe in that all things, animate as well as inanimate, have souls or spiritual power. So While in our culture, our personal culture, it may be taboo to be in a romantic relationship with something like a video game, it is a bit more accepted in Japan because, according to their religion, said video game does have a soul. Some of the implications of imagination replacing sense perception in relation to the otaku culture is people with social anxieties or social disorders can find love or be in a happy romantic relationship without having to worry about the physical aspect, their sense of touch even coming into play, because it is purely an imaginary relationship, and they don't have to worry about things like sexual feeling even playing a role. Another positive implication is that sexual assault rates may go down or may decrease because of the fact that people are no longer participating in, people will no longer have a carnal desire because of the romantic relationship they have with their video game. So there will be less of a desire to want to participate in sex without a separate person's consent, because the separate person is no longer even a part of it. Some negative implications is that there can be a social divide among people, because when people find romantic relationships with things like video games and other sorts, they lack the need to go out and meet other people in the real world because they no longer want to have sex with them, so they will no longer feel to socially connect with them. And the last negative implication is that people will simply stop getting married and having sex, and so population levels may decrease because they will no longer be having children. And this is actually something the country of Japan is facing right now. As I mentioned earlier, they predict that in the next 50 years, the Japanese population will have decreased by 1/3. Next is my second real life situation. It is Emily's Oz, an Xfinity commercial that Comcast put out during the 2015 Oscars.
I think about the shape. I think about color. I also think about sound. I take it into my brain and I think about what would it look like to me. My Tin Man has a big toe the size of a house. The lion is small like a toy pup and has webbed duck feet. And he is very scared of everything. My scarecrow has wooden teeth, and his fingernails are really long, and his clothes have tubes on them. And that's Dorothy. She looks like me.
Everyone has a favorite movie. Now, people with visual disabilities can find theirs. Comcast is proud to introduce the first talking guide from Xfinity. Visit emilysoz.com for more.
Thank you. That was a short film Comcast created to advertise for their talking guide for people with visual disabilities. The filmmakers behind it interviewed a young blind girl whose name is Emily about how she imagines or gets mental images of the movie The Wizard of Oz in her head, because she doesn't even have light perception. She can't see at all. So any vision she gets in her head about what Wizard of Oz would look like to her is purely based on her imagination. To connect this to my knowledge question, to what extent can imagination replace sense perception? Emily's imagination, what the Wizard of Oz would look like, is replaced by Emily's sense perception of what the Wizard of Oz would look like is replaced by her imagination. Some of the implications of this are and other young people, other blind people like her, are no longer missing out on a human experience, like watching a movie or hitting that vision, because they have the mental image themselves. Emily still gets to live in like a childlike way and have childlike experiences, because in her culture in the United States, movie watching is a great part of typical childhood. And another positive implication that comes from Xfinity's commercial is that it gives a new insight to seeing people like myself on an old movie. I never thought that The Wizard of Oz, it wouldn't seem that The Wizard of Oz would seem this way, but because we have the insight from Emily's imagination, we see a whole new perspective on it. The directors behind it in an interview about making the movie making process, they never questioned why Emily saw things the way they did. They just trusted that was the way it seemed in her imagination and created based on that. The only negative implication I could come up with is that it may skew the seeing audience's mental image of the movie of The Wizard of Oz, because it creates a whole new physicality to the movie. Christopher Berger, a doctoral student at the Department of Neuroscience in Sweden, conducted an experiment testing how imagination can affect sense perception. And for example, one of his experiments where he displayed a white circle of light to his participants and projected a sound. And the majority of the participants believed the sound was coming from where the white light was coming, despite the fact that it was coming from a completely different area. This is because their imagination played an important role in how they thought they perceived, even though they were perceiving something completely different. Something he said is that we found that what we imagine hearing can change what we actually see, and what we imagine seeing can change what we actually hear. I thought this was important because while he may not have proved that imagination can replace sense perception, he shows support that imagination definitely affects sense perception. So to conclude, sense perception can be, if you wanted to conclude, to answer the question, to what extent can imagination replace sense perception, if you were to say to a great extent, it can replace sense perception, because people lacking the desired form of sense perception can use their imaginations to regain normalcy by creating a whole new personal experience based on their imagination, not what they perceive. And if you were to say to little extent, it could be because while new experiences can be made for imagination, either other ways of knowing or other senses are needed to complete the process of imagination replacing sense perception. Such as with the otakus, their emotions, another way of knowing, came into play when replacing a sexual experience with their imaginary girlfriends, imaginary relationships, and with Emily, she still needed to hear another form of sense perception in order to intake her idea of what the movie would look like. So just to wrap up, even though both situations are completely different, one very adult, one very innocent, one from the culture of Japan, one from the culture of the United States, both people are lacking something necessary to sense perceive, and their imaginations help replace that situation. Thank you.